As we look at original man, as portrayed in the Bible, point 24 brings to mind Offspring Endowment, where the original man, one of them called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. Filial endowments are recognized as being an ultimate resource and expression of Homo sapiens. To find this characteristic listed among the ancients invited a restructuring of our views of a man's history. This is a fact. I think a lot of anthropology is conjecture and evidently fiction. Material accumulation, cultural, dwell in tents, have cattle, and large numbers of individuals are emphasized in the context of having possessions. Previously, an individual had built a city, and now the description reaches beyond incidental practice to include the community. Point 26, Futuristic Projection. Jabal, he was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such that have cattle. We here discover a principle of action and influence which intentionally passes to succeeding generations a resource of tents and cattle. Included in this influence upon future generations is the voluntary response of individuals within those future generations. Manual dexterity, point 27, such as handle the harp and the organ. Handling harps and organs requires conceptual and physical expertise of uncommon accomplishment. Skillful manipulation of instruments enlarges the musician and the cultural audience, particularly if the young are exposed to the influence of music. Artistic appreciation. All such as handle the harp and the organ, a community or guild association is most definitely implicated within the statement. Responsive appreciation in harmony with skillful dexterity would warrant applause from any historian looking back on this generation. Point 29, responsibility assumption. An instructor of every artificer. The text could imply that the instructor worked with every single individual who was learning to work as an artisan, or that he worked with individuals in various kinds of implements. In either case, the responsibility is phenomenal. Instructional comprehension. Instructor of every, so on. Cultural anthropologists and archaeologists have occupied decades in documenting isolated cultures in an attempt to follow their growth patterns from implement fabrication to instructional repetition. When this facility is verified, the colony is identified as being industrialized. Such is the case in this text. 31. Systematic education. Instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. If the intent of the text is that each succeeding student is referred to the primary instructor, or that artisans are returning to the primary instructor as they take on work with new materials, the result is the same. Systematic instruction is established within a community or the entire culture. Point 32. Technological advancement in brass and iron. Those who examine ancient civilizations separate brass and iron into distinct eras of development. Specific technology is required in the research, even if it is trial and error, and repeatable methods of fabricating implements from metallic bases. The purpose in making specific implements involved an advancement in the use of tools, spanning both eras in the fabrication and purposeful use of the instrumentation demands of comprehension and assimilation at least equal to our own advanced civilization, and it probably deserves a designation superior to our own. Attire awareness. And Lamech said unto his two wives, Adah and Zillah. In the original Hebrew, the name Adah means elegant ornament. Names are given designating a characteristic held by the person being named or renamed, or a characteristic desired by the person giving the name. Such designations are given in the reference to a known commodity or characteristic within the sphere of experience. Ornamentation and attire must have been observed in order to make such a distinction with the naming of an individual. Point 34. Personal defense. And Lamech said unto his two wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my sounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. A marvelous explanation is here offered by a husband found slaying a young man who had wounded him and who had intended ultimate harm to him, apparently desiring the goodwill and understanding of his wives. Lamech presented a full explanation of his own behalf. He was no longer in danger from the murderous young man, but he offers a self-defense explanation for his own home, and perhaps in view of repercussions which might follow afterwards. Point 35. Comparative justice. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech is 70 and sevenfold. Reference is made to Cain, who in the past had sevenfold penalty promised upon anyone executing further injury toward him, and a true declaration of righteousness is stated with a 70 and sevenfold vengeance. Point 36. Judicial consensus. Said unto his wives, Hearken unto my speech. The speaker is asking both persons addressed to listen and follow with consent. Extensive details given with a specific request relating to those details. Reference is made by Lamech to his speech. A deliberate attempt is made to gain a unified response from both persons addressed. This is strikingly similar to our own judicial system. Logistic reasoning. To my wounding, to my heart, avenge sevenfold, truly 70 and sevenfold. Explanation is given twice that the young man was performing moral damage against the speaker. There is a progression of criminal infliction from wounding to ultimate hurt, death, being exercised by the offending party. An appeal is made to understand that the speaker had slain the young man in order to protect his own life. Then a reference to comparative vengeance is claimed. This included both inductive and deductive reasoning powers in brilliant display. Speech declamation. Hearken unto my speech. What follows is based on reflection, is thought out in advance, is addressed to a given audience, is systematic in presenting details, and is specific in requiring a response. This we call speech form, and it represents complicated actions, reasoning powers, and delivery. Peer relationships. Hearken, relationships both in the present and in the past. Rendered both relations both in the present and in the response rendered in the future are encompassed in the related text. Sorry about that. Sympathetic understanding is obviously requested by Lamech. So there's a great deal of sophistication here. This is not original man, as archaeologists might say. Reputation and status. I have slain a man. The context clearly bears the sense of Lamech's concern for understanding among those who would learn of the event. Great pains are taken to explain that the young man was attempting to slay the speaker. Point 41. Emotional response. Positive. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, and called him his name Seth. For God said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. A child is named in grateful response to a loving God who understood the emotional void left after a previous child had been lost. Civilized awareness and conscientious response ensue. Point 42. Providential compensation. The Bible reads, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. Awareness of providential justice and purpose underlies a basic philosophy within a culture. Ancient ability to hold a concept of benevolent philosophy endows ancient man with extremely sophisticated thought processes. In some instances, man is able to purposefully and benevolently display consideration upon another, to no less a degree of his awareness of divine intervention for his benefit would reflect the evidence of this major sophisticated characteristic within ancient man. Point 43. Historical perspective. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness. A sense of having counted each year with its relationship in time to preceding and succeeding years is complicated enough, especially without ancestors to give a learning reference. In this instance, we have exposed an additional ability, that of recycling number values, counting past 100. Additionally, we have related the birth of a son, and the son is associated with and compared to the characteristics of his father. Passage of time and events with association are therefore in view. Obituarial documentation. And Adam lived, begat sons and daughters, and he died. Only advanced peoples record the birth, events, offspring, and death of inhabitants. This practice memorializes the memory and record for succeeding generations. Point 45. Religious influence. And he called his name Enos. Then began men to call on the name of the Lord. A very interesting enlightenment here is provided for anthropologists in keeping with their observations in numerous cultures. The child is named Enos, which means a living moral individual and one who, by definition, is obligated and to be appreciative to the one who gave him life, and one who is dependent on his creator for sustaining that life. His name takes the form of a declared statement. The influence of that name is that men begin to call upon the name of the Lord. The meaning and person of the name influenced men in religious response to call upon the name of the Creator who is needed to sustain all men as mortals. This humble religious response is anthropologically elevating because primitive cultures tend to think of themselves as the only people rather than responding in religious humility. "46. Lots and lots of points up to 46 points of how sophisticated original man was. He didn't start making a stick as a weapon. He was into metallic things, bronze and iron weapons. Genetic superiority, and Adam and Eve were an enhanced and 130 years old. And Adam and Eve were 130 years old and begat a son. The ability to conceive and birth a son at 130, then to continue to bear sons and daughters, is indicative of superior genetics. Purpose in the genetic design is demonstrated as each reproduces after its kind. So you have people that are far more advanced in childbearing, just that one thing. Genetic viability, begat sons and daughters, dwelt in tents, instructed, handled, hearkened, built. The ability to conceive and birth a son at 130, then to continue to bear sons and daughters, is indicative of superior genetics. Purpose in the genetic design is demonstrated as Enoch reproduces after its kind. Origin's Inquisition. And he called his name Noah, saying, This same shall be comfort us in concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord had cursed. The basic philosophic inquiries are, who am I? Where did I come from? What is my purpose here? And where am I going?